And then I think number two is just my age. Like I definitely had people when I was posting on LinkedIn initially that were like, what do you know? You're a 19-year-old, you're a 20-year-old, you're a 21-year-old. I'm 23 now and I still hear it. And I'm fine with that because, again, going back to what I said initially, I only try to talk about things that I know about, that I have experiences within.
Welcome back to Gen Z Talks, where today we've got another exciting episode ahead of us. We will be discussing key topics such as entrepreneurship, innovation, education, building your network and deep connections, as well as touching on mental health. And we're delighted to be joined by a special guest from Canada who has a glittering CV, especially for someone of such a young age. This includes a 3 times TEDx speaker, CEO of Trufan, UN Youth Ambassador, and a previous consultant to Google and American Express. I'm delighted to be joined today by Swish Goswami. Swish, welcome.
Cool. Thanks so much for having me, Dan. Appreciate it.
No, it's a pleasure. Perhaps you can elaborate on my overview of your background, because I've probably missed something, and I know you've got a very glittering CV already.
Totally. Yeah, no, 95% of my week is obviously spent on a company called Trufan. We started the company about 2.5 years ago, and we're approaching 3 years on December 7th, which is pretty crazy to think. And we're a team of 20 now. We are based in Toronto, raised about 1.8 million. We work with over 750 businesses and over 4,000 free users, and help them essentially find who their top fans on social media are. So we acquired this platform in November 2019 called SocialRank. We were building a fan engagement platform before that. So we unified the two together, and we put out this pretty comprehensive solution that helps a brand go through their entire following on Instagram or Twitter, and then find an audience that they want to target by going through and filtering their audience or filtering their competitor's audience. So that's kind of my full-time job. Along with that, I obviously love speaking. So I've been speaking now for about 3 years. Firstly with the National Speakers Bureau, and now with Speaker Spotlight, which is my bureau on record. As well as I have a book coming out called The Young Entrepreneur that was supposed to come out this year. Sadly, due to COVID, got pushed back to next year.
Excellent. And before we dive into the core questions, I'm sure our viewers are keen to know about the whole experience and process of speaking at TEDx, not just once, but 3 times. Mm-hmm. How did that come about? And tell us about the experience.
Totally, yeah. So obviously, TEDx was something that came up more out of a personal passion, if you will. Like I did actually appreciate watching TED Talks growing up. It's funny though, in grade 11 and 12, I had a business called Canada Thinks that was very anti-TED, if you will, because I just felt like TED was where like speakers would come up and, you'd speak and then you just leave. And there's no kind of interaction between the attendee and the speaker. So I kind of went out to try to create like a better conference for millennials called Canada Thinks. And so I think kind of in university, after I'd spoken quite a bit on my experience with building Canada Thinks, and after also debating, one of the organizers at TEDx U of T just reached out to me in my second semester and said, hey, look, one of our speakers dropped out. Are you interested in talking about social entrepreneurship? Because I know that you did a lot of work in high school around nonprofits and building out your own conferencing platform that went on to give money back to young entrepreneurs. So that's exactly what I did, gave that talk. And then obviously this is around the time where I was also thinking about entrepreneurship. So as I started to build Trufan out in the early days, I then got invited to do a talk in Alberta on personal branding and storytelling, specifically on LinkedIn, which is where I kind of grew most of my community, as well as then doing a third talk on mental health, which really stemmed from my experiences, not just as a student, but as an entrepreneur and what I've gone through.
Fantastic. And you mentioned LinkedIn there, Swish. I noticed from your profile that you've generated over 100 million views from your content. How did you go about generating that amount of views, and what did it do for your career, your journey so far?
Yeah. So I think number one is, for me, in terms of the formula, there's no secret formula for LinkedIn. It's pretty straightforward in my opinion. is number one, consistency. So I posted content, whether it was interviewing people, whether it was sharing a weekly recap of building Trufan out, whether it was sharing a photo of me speaking at an event and giving like the 2 or 3 big takeaways in the caption. I just constantly put out content on a daily basis, especially for the first year or two of being on LinkedIn and trying to build up my community. The second aspect past consistency was the type of content I was sharing. It was super relatable initially to younger students, because when I was a student, I was feeling a lot of the things that other college students were feeling, right? Procrastination was a big issue, not knowing what I wanted to do, not having a passion or goal in mind, going through and quite honestly, having terrible work-life balance, and not eating right and not working out properly. Like, these are things that I talked about on LinkedIn because I knew that every college student could probably relate to it and identify with it. And then now I talk a lot about issues that entrepreneurs would face, especially with COVID that came around, talking about how you should pivot your business model, how you should go about retaining key employees, staying lean, etc. So these are the types of things that I put out in the form of content that I wanted to share because I wanted to relate to my audience. I didn't want to just talk about how great my life was. I wanted to talk about challenges that I was going through that I know other people could relate to and could connect with me on. And then I think the third and final aspect that was part of this formula was community. Early on, when I started seeing people comment on my posts on LinkedIn, I started actually replying to them and saying, can we get on a 5-minute call? And I just remember in Toronto in my second year being in an apartment and taking these 5-minute calls with random people who had commented on my post. And the reason I did it is A, to obviously broaden my network, but B, so that the next time they saw my post, they would have this idea of who Swish was on a deeper level than just an avatar and a name, right? So that's really, I think, what helped me is my community that I built up of 35, 40, 45 people that really liked my content and knew me were the ones that constantly commented on my posts to make it go viral, to make it spread a lot quicker. Because again, from a formulaic perspective, from an algorithm perspective, LinkedIn works as like the first 30 minutes to an hour, the more comments you get on your post, the more likely that post is going to go viral and be shared on several different feeds. So that's a lot of what I did on kind of the formula and like what I did to really have viral content. In terms of why I wanted to do that, I mean, I personally just wanted to have an outlet to speak about what I was going through as a student, and then as an entrepreneur, I wanted to share the lessons and tips and advice that I got and spread that on a broader level to my community. And that's honestly why even to date, I consistently post on LinkedIn. I keep sharing my story on it because it's just been a fantastic way for me to be able to find an outlet, and then also to be able to do things like speaking and writing a book. That all came from LinkedIn when people started to notice my content and what I was doing.
Excellent. Great stuff, Swish. And I'm sure a lot of young entrepreneurs are looking up to you in terms of what you've achieved.
Right.
You're known as a serial tech entrepreneur. Can you tell us how you built up your brand in such a competitive environment? And also, how did you, what challenges did you overcome along the way? And how did you overcome them?
I think two challenges right off the bat were, number one, imposter syndrome. Like, as an entrepreneur, I've definitely done certain things, but I know I've also done, limited things, right? I haven't, things that I haven't done, for example, haven't IPO'd a business, haven't hired more than 20 people on our team. We're currently at 20, haven't raised more than 4 or 5 million in a series A or a series B or series C, so there's things that I haven't done, but, I think that feeling of imposter syndrome is definitely something that does come up when you're giving advice online. Am I the right person to do this? Am I even listening to my advice? Am I walking my talk? That's number one on a more mental level. And then I think number two is just my age. Like, I definitely had people when I was posting on LinkedIn initially that were like, what do you know? You're a 19-year-old, you're a 20-year-old, you're a 21-year-old. I'm 23 now and I still hear it. And I'm fine with that because, again, going back to what I said initially, I only try to talk about things that I know about, that I have experiences within. You will never hear me talk about Bitcoin. You will never hear me talk about IPOing a company because I've never done that sort of stuff to be able to have context and experience into what it's like to do that. So that's one thing that makes me feel comfortable, is even when people do sometimes jab at me, which is, it rarely happens now, thankfully, but it does still happen. When people jab at me and say, what do you know? I'm able to immediately go back and say, well, I actually do know a lot about this because I've done X, Y, and Z, and able to kind of show my track record. The first part of your question, sorry, I totally blanked out on that. What was the first part of the question before challenges?
In terms of how did you go about building up your brand?
Right.
Yeah,
in such a competitive environment.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, imagine you've got an aspiring entrepreneur. I'm thinking about something like even like choosing a co-founder, the value of a co-founder, the team you can
Hmm.
start with. Where do you go to start with a
Yep.
small team potentially? And these are probably things going
Yeah.
through young entrepreneurs' minds who are a bit daunted by doing it themselves.
Totally. I mean, look, so first of all, when it comes to building a personal brand in a cutthroat competitive environment, the number one thing you can do is actually do something meaningful. So what I mean by that is build a proper business. And I guarantee you, if you're able to say, hey guys, I built a profitable company in 2 years or 3 years, or I've hired 25 people, or I've raised 10 million in a series A or a seed round or whatever it is, eyeballs are going to come your way, either on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. People are just, they're constantly looking to capture content from people who have done great things. So I think the easy answer on the personal branding side is to do those great things. In terms of how to do them though, on a business side, like, yeah, I definitely recommend having a co-founder. You don't need one. I think there are a lot of entrepreneurs that are great on their own. But for me, personally speaking, when we were going into Trufan, building a software company, I knew I needed to have a technical co-founder because I knew I wasn't the type of person that could go through and build this platform out or understand what developers are talking about. And that's where, I met my co-founder maybe when I was 17, he was 16 at an award ceremony. We had both won this award called Top 20 Under 20, and we had gone our different ways, but we had kind of stayed in touch still on social media. So I started to look into my network to try to find technical developers, and I found him and said, it's worth a shot. And he was studying at Stanford at the time, doing his second year comp sci engineering. And I told him about the idea. He loved it. We proved out a minimum viable product. We built a prototype. It worked fairly well. He decided to drop out of school. I was obviously full-time on the idea as well. And we decided to start the company, raise money, and then go in and start the company really in Vancouver. And then after raising more money, we moved to Toronto. So again, that whole process was very organic. It wasn't like when I was 17, I was like, yes, a 16-year-old who I have won this award will now be my co-founder within 3 or 4 years. I had no plan whatsoever for that. But it's funny because when you put yourself out there and you start to kind of build your network up, it's amazing that when you have an idea, you can actually go back and take a look at it, and you have options then on who you draw upon for help, advice, or working with you on an idea.
Excellent. Thanks, Swish. And in terms of age, the age thing, was it ever a
Mm-hmm.
hindrance? I'm talking about maybe when you're pitching for to investors, trying to build up key connections that are going to kind of help your
Mm-hmm.
business. Did you have any knockbacks or any difficulties because of your age?
I mean, because my age, I don't know actually. I mean, it's a good question. I definitely nothing overt. Definitely no one like when I was raising money said, "Oh, you're too young for this." And I think actually, weirdly enough, entrepreneurship is one of those fields where like being young actually isn't that much of a hindrance. Like I think it's a hindrance when you talk about what you built online, because again, people will just view your age and say, "What do you know?" And definitely there are a lot of things I don't know, but there's certain aspects of life that I feel like I've done quite a bit within that I can speak to with conviction. But at the same time, when it comes to building a business, like you take a look at all the people raising money in Silicon Valley, you see the people that are, going through Y Combinator, going through the DMZ program at Ryerson's DMZ, like a lot of them are young people. A lot of them are like 25, 26, 24. So if anything, I actually think the hindrance when it comes to age is more on people past the age of 50. Like I think people like who are 55 and 60 probably have more hindrance when it comes to raising money than a 22-year-old or 21-year-old would when it comes to raising money. So that was number one. And I think number two, it just depends on who you raise money from. Like the people I went to early on were people who I knew believed in me because I had either interviewed them before or I'd met them through a mutual connection. I kept them in touch with my story, what I was doing. They liked me as a person. So it's easy once I went to them to be able to get them on board. And once I got like 8 to 9 of these great investors on board, then I could go to other investors who I didn't know on a personal level and tell them that so far I have these 8, 9 investors on board. They'll take a look at those names, see that they're fairly qualified, and have more conviction and more trust in my idea.
Excellent, Swish. And in terms of pitching to the investors, what did you go for in terms of how did you prepare for pitch, and what advice could you give to aspiring or young entrepreneurs who need to take this next step and to get investment?
Totally. I
What
mean,
do you tell them in terms of preparation?
totally. The two things when it comes to pitching, I mean, number one is being reasonable, which I think is a lost art in today's world. Um, I'll explain this by saying, I think every kid that starts a company wants to build $1 billion company. right? You want to build a unicorn. You want to be wealthy. You want to have an idea that impacts millions of people. But it's really important, especially in those early days of raising money and pitching, that you don't oversell your idea. You don't go in and tell an investor this is a $1 billion idea before we've even built the damn thing. So for us, the reason I think why a lot of investors gravitated towards us, and even to date, even right now, we'll tell you we're not building a $1 billion company. We don't think we are. We're very reasonable with our goals on a yearly basis, but also in terms of what we're building. We know that Trufan can be an $80 to $100 million company one day. We're working towards that. We're still far away from that, but we know we can get there. But we know with the current ideas and the current platform that we've built out, it's not a $1 billion idea. And we're very open to telling investors that, and they actually appreciate that because it makes them really believe in us as entrepreneurs a lot more. I think number two then is to do your homework, right? Pass the basic information on like having your financials all sorted out, having a deck, making sure you prove where the money is going to go towards. Do your research on the investor. Understand, who are they? What have they invested in before? What are some of the things they've talked about in the media that they're excited about, right? Like a lot of our investors are fairly high profile, where if I go and YouTube them, I'll find some of their keynotes, I'll find some of their talks, and I'm going to watch them to understand what really interests them. What are some of the beliefs that they have that might be contrarian, where a lot of people would disagree with them on, but maybe they agree and believe this thing, right? Just so I have an idea of when I go and talk to them, how can I immediately relate to them and find common ground with them to build that relationship off?
Excellent. Thanks, Rich. That's great. Great value there. And I just want to go on to, I know you were on the advisory board for the League of Innovators. There's obviously a surge in innovation, especially now on the back of COVID-19. What skill set do you think Generation Z can bring to the workplace in terms of, and is innovation one of those skills which they could really bring value into the workplace in terms of their entrepreneurial mindset? I know you've been previously an advisor to a consultant to Google and the likes of American Express. So
Totally.
What would you advise them in terms of your generation's skill set, especially with a focus around innovation?
I think there are two aspects there. Number one is when it comes to innovation, I do believe that my generation is a lot more entrepreneurial than previous generations, but I also see that not just because of who we are, but kind of what the world has become, right? The barrier to entry to create a business is a lot lower now than ever before. If you wanted to build a software company 20, 25 years ago, the startup costs that are associated to creating that and the kind of learning curve also that came with starting a software company when the internet first began was a lot higher than it is now, where you have, anyone can literally go online right now and start a Shopify store, name it blank, 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 put some pictures up and start selling anything. So I think it's important to know that my generation definitely is entrepreneurial. And that's because also of the world that we live in, the options that we have to be entrepreneurial and test our ideas out. And that does mean, in my opinion, that we are likely to be more innovative because we're likely to see an entrepreneurial approach where other people might see it through a bureaucratic and slower process. I think number two is social media and being digitally minded, right? Like we, especially, Gen Z, which I would definitely find myself within that group of people. We haven't grown up in a world that has not really known the internet, that hasn't really also known social media, because I think I was maybe 11 or 12 or 10 even when Facebook came out. So it's important to know that like we grew up with these tools. We know how to communicate on these tools. We know how to talk on these tools. And there is value intrinsically with our digital savviness, I guess, in terms of how we go about interacting with people and communicating with them.
Excellent. Thanks, Swish. And I want to move on to kind of networking and your network. I've seen you speak previously about building your net worth through your network. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, I've told people this constantly. It doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur or not. You should focus on building a strong network, because especially during times like this where you can go into recessionary periods, you could lose your job anytime. And the one thing hopefully you could fall back upon is the people that you know to help you get another job. And so networking, in my opinion, is crucial, because if you have a strong network built out, you hopefully will be able to rebound from losing your job really easily. If you have a strong network built out during a time like COVID, you'll hopefully be able to find 1 or 2 or 3 customers that can keep your shop afloat. You'll find a couple of great employees that potentially would come on and work for a lot cheaper because they believe in you as a person and believe in your idea because of that. So I think having a strong network is really important. And the number one tip I normally give for networking is to interview people. It's exactly what I did 3.5, 4 years ago, is start a podcast or create an article series on LinkedIn or Medium and start writing about other people, right? And so for me, I messaged a lot of people on Instagram and LinkedIn, and I said, hey, I have this awesome article series on LinkedIn called Unconventional. I write about trailblazers that I look up to personally. Can I take 15 to 20 minutes of your time next week to interview you? And 99% of people love talking about themselves. I believe I'm exhibit A. And a lot of people replied saying, yeah, let's do it. I'd get on that phone call with them. I'd write down, their answers to my questions that I asked mainly about their story, and I'd publish the article. And I found that I actually built a great repo with them because the number one thing I did was not take away time from them, which is what asking for coffee is. I actually gave them something of value right back off the first time I met them, which is writing this article about them that they can now share and spread to their network. So again, networking, in my opinion, is about providing value up front. And a lot of what you can do in today's world to do that at a kind of low budget, $0 budget, if you will, is just interview people, build a podcast, create an interview series, and put out content through there.
Thanks, Swish. And just to further a question on that, how do you go from building your network to building and establishing deep connections within your network that are going to really kind of take you forward, maybe your business or you as a person?
Well, that's where, past the first interaction, imagine you interview this person, a lot of what you need to do is follow up. And so what I mean by that is the reason I think why I'm fairly good at networking is, number one, I value my network. So even after, they've introduced me to someone, imagine I was looking for an introduction to an awesome CEO that I think could be a great user of Trufan. I'll go back, by the way, after my first interaction with that CEO, and I'll tell the person who introduced me how that conversation went. I will follow up with that person, thank them, and say, here's, by the way, what conversation we had, just so you know, right? Most people don't even do that. Like, I've set up multiple introductions for people where I set the intro up and I never hear back from them, never, until like 3 or 4 years later where they're like, can you help me again? And I'm less likely to help you out if you didn't really keep me in the flow and keep me in, loop on what's happening in your life. I think number 2 is spontaneously reaching out to people. And again, with COVID, you don't need an excuse to do this now, right? Reach out to the people that you haven't talked to in a while and say, hey man, how are things going? That's a perfectly valid question to ask in today's world. So I think, for me, one of the big things I did during COVID is I definitely gave people their space because I knew everyone had to handle the situation in their own way. But as things started to open up, I started reaching out to people and saying, how are things going? How are the last few months been? Can I do anything to help? Just to reach back and really be there for my network, because I know for sure that if I'm there for them, they're going to be there for me if I ever need anything in the future.
Excellent. So do you think, Swish, that your network is more important than getting good grades at school? Not just your network, but people skills and the ability to build relationships. Is this
really do.
More important than academics?
I really do. And that's just my personal opinion. Like, again, I'd like to tell you an answer where I said, no, grades matter. But the problem too is that most schools don't have a class on public speaking. Most schools do not have a class on financial literacy. Most schools do not have a class on pitching or sales. Most schools do not have a class on debate and how to go about critically thinking about another side and truly breaking down their argument. So the problem, in my opinion, is that when it comes to the whole social element of business, when it comes to the whole social element of being a citizen, school does not do a lot to help us in that aspect. So that's, I think, where really putting yourself out there, attending events, attending conferences, putting out content. If you're scared of putting your face on social media, maybe just share, your text, write some words up, share that, interview people if you're scared of even sharing your own opinion first. There are things that you can do to really get a step ahead when it comes to learning these skills that I think are just so instrumental, right? Like, had I not done debate, I really don't think that I would be able to do a lot of public speaking. I don't think I'd be able to go and pitch people on my company. I don't think I'd be able to go about convincing people to join our company. Especially early on, we found some great talent who were literally working for us at 50% what they were making before, because they genuinely believed in the idea and they believed in me. So that was all stuff that I learned from my time debating, where I had to convince judges that my side was right. And that's where I had to learn a lot of that at a very early age without really my school's backing. But thankfully, it's been able to translate to some real victories in my professional life.
Thanks, Swish. So going back to education, what changes would you like to see in the education system, especially at university? And second question onto that to answer is it necessary for entrepreneurs to go to university now, or should they just go straight into setting up and setting up what they intend to without going to higher education?
Yeah. So, I've obviously dropped out of school after second year of University of Toronto, and you might expect me to be very anti-college, but I'm really not. I actually do see the value in university. I see the value in college. But I do qualify that by saying I don't think everyone should have to go to university. Especially if you're spending a lot of money to go to college, you're accumulating debt, and you're trying to get a degree that you will never use. I.e., this is just a personal thing of mine. I don't really appreciate people who go to law school and don't ever practice law. Like, I don't like the people generally who go to law school and they run their own business after, or they join an investment firm. Like, I would like people to at least test law out, to practice it a little bit. But if you're literally going to law school and you already have your mind made up that after law school, I'm going to start a business, you are wasting a lot of money, and you are taking a spot from another student, in my opinion, who could benefit from that opportunity a lot more. So for me personally, I think it's a case-by-case basis. If you want to go to college, great. But if you have an idea already that college likely wouldn't help you with what you want to do, i.e. maybe starting a business, maybe take a year off, or maybe take 2 years off before you start college. Start that idea, see how it goes. And if it doesn't go well, college can kind of be your fallback option. That was literally what it was for me. When I started Trufan, I was like, if this doesn't work, well, great. I'm going back to the University of Toronto. I'm going to continue my studies. Yes, I might graduate 2 or 3 years later than all my friends, but I don't care, because at the end of the day, I'm learning all of these different things about my passions, my life, what I want to do, entrepreneurship, that I otherwise would not have learned if I had stayed in school and regretted this experience. So that's number one. I think in terms of universities and how they can do better, I'm again in no position to lecture universities on what they need to do. But the things that do pop out to me is, number one, have a variety of different courses that are mandatory, I think, to take, that truly teach people how to speak publicly, that truly teach people how to negotiate, that truly teach people how to feel confident. This stems even into mental health. I think universities do a terrible job of addressing mental health issues. I think universities don't do a great job in terms of educating people that every single person in the world has mental health. They do, right? The problem is we hear about mental health issues. We're like, I can't relate to this, but you can, because every single person has mental health. Mental health exists on a spectrum. You fluctuate from sometimes feeling down in life to feeling great, as like, I'm top of the world, I'm the king, I'm the queen of the world. And you can relate to times where people feel really shitty. And that's the type of stuff we need to be teaching in college, that you shouldn't have to learn at a event like jack.org, which is an event on mental health that is entirely separate from college altogether. So that's a bit about my rant for college. I think at the end of the day, it's a case-by-case basis if you want to go. For me, I didn't find it valuable, other than it helped me find a lot of my friends who I'm very, very grateful for, which is why I would never take back my 2 years of going to college. But I know a lot of people that are in this boat where they're being forced to go to college and they really don't want to. That's where I take a second look at your life. I talk to your parents. I'd say, give me 1 year to prove myself. Give me 1 year to prove myself. If I start a business, if I do blank, 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 my passion, and it works out and I can, really sustain myself on my own, I want you to believe in me and let me do this.
Thanks, Swish. And you mentioned mental health there. For entrepreneurs, there's going to be long periods of isolation and loneliness when you're building a business up. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs who, a lot of them are starting by themselves in their room? How do they keep motivated and focused? And, how do they keep their mindset, fresh? Because obviously creativity is vital. So what advice do you have for starting out entrepreneurs in terms of the mindset and mental health?
Yeah. So I think number one is to understand that if you've come into entrepreneurship for the money, or if you've come into entrepreneurship for, you know, flying around in private jets and getting bottle service every weekend and, you know, just being in publications and interviews and all of that, you're probably going in for the wrong reasons. The number one thing you need to be passionate about is the problem that you're solving, or the value that you are giving customers who are now able to do something that they otherwise were not able to do before. So that's what you really got to attach your motivation around. You shouldn't attach your motivation to build a business around money, because the money doesn't come that quick. And sometimes it also, by the way, never comes. You know, there are companies that have gone through, they've raised millions of dollars. They haven't gotten that payout at the very end that the founders expected they'd get. So just note that your motivation should be wrapped around the problem you're solving or the value you're providing customers, because that is a great way, by the way, to get over those lonely nights that you are bound to have. You're bound to have nights where you're working at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. You're working pretty much on your idea alone. Even if you have employees, you know, employees normally clock off at around 6:30, 7 o'clock at the latest. You are likely going to be working lonely hours, you know, really long hours, alone in front of your laptop in a dark room, thinking, what have I got myself into? And that, again, is where, if your motivation is wrapped around the right reasons, you will persist, you will continue to go. And so for me now, like, my motivation is obviously not just around my problem that I'm solving, it's now actually around my team as well. Like, I genuinely love working with the people we've assembled around her. And I know that if I don't show up to work every day and put my all and really try to commit to this idea and help the company get through tough times, I know that I'm not only compromising my own success, I'm compromising the success of every single person on our team who I deeply care about. So I've kind of wrapped my motivation now around two very powerful things that I know are going to allow me to persist and get through anything.
Thanks, Swish. I want to end this fantastic interview with looking at the next 12 months for you. What's in store for Swish going forward, and where do you want to be this time next year?
Oh, I mean, look, for Trufan, we have some pretty lofty goals where we're trying to hit 1,200 customers, so about 500 more in the next 3 months, which we think is fairly doable with our track record since COVID began. So we're looking to end off the year at around 1,200 customers, around 4,000, 5,000 free users. And then from there, you know, next year, we're just looking to grow. You know, my goal is hopefully to be a team of 35, 40, to be able to have more than 2,500, 3,000 customers if we can by the end of 2021, to have more than 15,000, 20,000 free users, and to really blow this thing up. So that's kind of everything on the Trufan side. My book, like I mentioned, it was supposed to come out this year. It's going to come out next year. I'm looking forward to getting that out. Looking forward to speaking now, not just virtually, but on stages again, being able to meet people in person. I'm hoping for that. And I'm also just generally just hoping for the well-being of my family. You know, my mom and my brother are going through a very transitionary phase in life. My brother's going back to a job that he had before he did his clerkship as a lawyer. And my mom is kind of starting a new path of potentially starting her own business or working for a new employer. So I'm hoping for their well-being too in 2021.
Swish, thanks for your excellent insights today. You've provided excellent content, which is no doubt appreciated by our viewers, and it's going to make a real big impact. So thanks again, Swish, for your time today.
No worries. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.